All right, so the first technique that we're going to do with alcohol inks, we're going to use these alcohol ink tools. And we're going to put the alcohol inks right on them, and we're going to stamp the alcohol ink right onto our surface. Now, when you're new to alcohol inks, what I would suggest is going with colors that are close to each other on the color wheel. Doesn't really matter which ones, it's your personal preference, but I wouldn't go with opposite ones because opposite colors combine and they end up making brown. So just so that you don't end up with a bunch of brown, I would choose ones that are somewhat close to each other on the color wheel, because then you know that they're going to coordinate well together. So for this particular one, I'm using Meadow, I'm using Turquoise, and I'm using Purple Twilight. So first I'm just going to use just these three colors, and then I will add some silver metallic mixative to it. So the tools come in a rectangle shape or a circle shape. There's no difference between the two other than the fact that they are rectangle and circle. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a few drops of each one. And I am squeezing the bottle just a little bit. And then I'm going to add a little bit of the alcohol blending solution. And that's just going to help the colors blend together with each other. If I didn't use this, the alcohol would dissipate too quickly and would end up just being dots. So even though, like right now when I'm doing it, it is dots, it will start blending. Now, one thing with the rectangle one is if you do like this, you're just going to get a pattern. So you want to make sure that you're moving them around. So the paper that I'm using right now is alcohol ink glossy cardstock. It is a it is a porous cardstock. It's clay coated, but it's got a glossy surface to it. So it just makes the alcohol inks really shine. It makes them look nice and vibrant. I'm just going to add more of each of these colors because I want those bits of alcohol ink to be bigger than they are. They're just too small. I'm going to add a little bit of this solution to it. That's better. And you can keep going with this for as long as you want until you get the look that you want. Right now we're just creating a background. Now, like I said, we're using glossy cardstock. It is the only cardstock that is porous that works well with alcohol inks. If you use regular cardstock here, see the difference between the two? They just don't, it just doesn't cut it. It just brightens up the alcohol inks and it makes them look absolutely beautiful. So once again, keep going. If you've done one layer and you just lightly tap, you end up getting these little tiny bits which add some texture to it. If you want, you can actually just put drops of the colors on there as well. So the one thing with the glossy cardstock is because it's non-porous, or because it's porous, I keep saying the wrong thing. If I were to say take some alcohol and just wipe this off, it wouldn't come out completely white. There would still be the colors in there because they are going right into the paper. So I'm just going to leave that, well, I'll just break up some of those colors a little bit there. I'm going to leave that to dry. Another surface that you can use is acetate. Now, if I just leave that like that, you can't actually see what I'm doing. So I'm going to put some white paper on there just so that you can see what I am doing here. And I really need to add some more alcohol to this, so I'm going to do that. And every time I do it, I do like between 3 and 5 drops. And again, I am squeezing a little bit, but I do add a tiny little bit of the blending solution because it just helps the colors blend together with each other better. Now you see how the difference in the colors that since I added some more. So you could use this on the front of a card, kind of like a stained glass, or you could stamp on it, whatever you want. You can also use the ink lift pad to remove the color from it, which is a technique that we will do in a different lesson. But the more you keep touching this, the more it keeps changing. So I'm going to let that aside to dry. Another surface very similar to the acetate that you can use is foil. So this is actually just foil, like plumber's tape. that I got from Home Depot. The limitation with that is it comes, I think this is 2 inches wide. It only comes in one width. So if you're doing the front of a card, you're gonna have a seam. So Ranger actually makes foil tape, which is perfect for doing for the front of cards, because then you have an entire surface without having a seam right in the middle of it. The seam really kind of takes away from it. But look how cool that alcohol ink reacts when I just drop some of the colors on there. It just pushes the colors out, and then you get a section of that color. And I can go right into, say, the blue and put a green, and then I'll see a green dot. It doesn't mix the two together. It just pushes it right out, which is really cool to see, and it's a fun thing to play with. So the thing with the acetate and with the foil, and as well as the Yupo, which I'm going to show in just a second, is because it's a completely non-porous surface, I could take some of the alcohol ink blending solution, or I could take some just isopropyl alcohol, which I happen to have in a dropper, and I also have in a mister. I could spray it, I could wipe it off, and I would have a clean surface. So if you didn't like what you were doing, you could completely clean your surface and start all over again. Which is great for when you're starting out, because it's nice to have that little bit of leeway. I'm just going to do the circle one only so that you see. It's really no different from the rectangle one, other than shape. But once again, even with the circle one, I want to make sure that I'm twisting it around, otherwise I'm going to end up having a pattern. So if you haven't heard of Yupo paper before, it's actually not paper, it's a plastic. It's a synthetic paper that works lovely with alcohol inks, and it's actually one of my favorite surfaces to work on because of the fact that it's completely non-porous. Everything sits on the top. I love the fact that you can wipe it clean. Now the thing with Yupo is it does stain, so even if you wipe it clean, it's not going to be completely white again. Likely it will have some staining from the colors that you were using before, but for the most part, if you didn't like what you were doing and you wiped it clean and you had some staining, you could just choose some colors that were a little bit darker than that so that it wouldn't affect that. But I love how with alcohol inks, even once it's dry, you can go back, I'm just going to do this while that's drying, and you can add some more layers. So you don't necessarily, it's not a one and done. You can go back and you can add extra layers to it. Now, you definitely want to make sure that you don't, like if I just were to do this, I would end up having a circle, so you want to kind of blend them out. You don't necessarily have to go over the whole surface. You can just do whatever it is that you like, but you want to make sure that you don't just do a bunch of dots, because it's going to look a little bit weird. And then even with the Yupo, I can go take just the alcohol inks themselves, and I can add dots. I can even do it with the blending solution. And create some really cool backgrounds with that. So I'm going to let these dry, and then I'll be back and show you some cards that I made with them. I'm back. One thing I've realized I forgot to show is I'm going to use some silver mixative. So you hear that little noise there? There's a little metal ball in there, and you want to make sure that when you're shaking it up, you hear that, because that's mixing up all the mica that's in there, and you want to make sure that that gets mixed up really well before you use it. So I'm going to put some of each of the colors on my felt, although I probably really don't need to because I think it's quite saturated. I'm going to add just a couple dots of the metallic. It can really take over something, so especially when you're first starting. So I'm just going to use 2 little ones, and that's probably actually too much, but I'm going to put some of the blending solution right in between that to break it up. And let's add the metallic to it. Once again, you want to make sure that you're turning your tool while you're stamping, because you don't want to end up with a repeating pattern all over it. You see how you get some metallic all over there? Now this particular, like using the ink blending tool, is really not my favorite way to use alcohol inks. That's kind of why I'm starting with it, because this is, when alcohol inks first came out, this is what you did. This is the only way you did it, and things have really advanced since then. So as we progress through this course, we're going to be using some of my more favorite ways to use alcohol inks, and alcohol inks are something I've been using for 15 years or so. So yeah, they definitely have progressed. I'm going to use a little bit on here too. Just break out some of those white dots. When I put the blending solution down, it really made some white dots that I've actually gotten a little bit rid of. But let's just change it up and add some of the silver to it. And now, all right, so this is what I did with those pieces. So the acetate, I just stamped a butterfly on it and then glued it to the front of a card. Now, I will put the list of all the supplies that I'm using for these samples with pictures of the sample so you remember exactly which one is used with which in the PDF supply list that is included with this class. Now, I use some matte collage medium to glue this together, so I am waiting for that to dry and hoping that it's not visible once it's completely dry. It's supposed to dry completely invisible and clear, but right now it does not look very well or very good. The Yupo paper that I did, I am going to save that for a future lesson. You'll see that in one of the upcoming ones. The foil piece, and I haven't actually glued this together. This is what I would like to do with it, but you see how we've got the seam in the middle? It really detracts from the card. So this is a good reason to use the full sheets from Ranger. The only reason I don't have them is because when I bought this foil tape, apparently I bought a lifetime supply. So I have a whole lot of it and I'm trying to use it up. You could do some sort of mixed media project with it where those seams were part of the design and that would not interfere with it. But for this particular card, I kind of thought this looked a little bit Northern Lights-ish-y, a little bit kind of. So I thought that would be really cool, but once I got it all together, I thought that that seam is just too visible for me to want to actually finish it like that. And then the glossy cardstock, since this particular technique is not necessarily my favorite anymore, I thought it would be good to just die cut the pieces and use them as silhouettes on the front of a card. Now I would put a little sentiment here. I typically wait to add my sentiments until I'm going to send a card out, because if I put happy birthday on here and this would have been the perfect one for a sympathy card, I want to keep my options open. So typically I don't put sentiments on cards until I'm ready to give them to someone. So that's what I've done with these samples. We'll see you in the next lesson.